When I was growing up, I would hear the older people say, God can't use no coward soldier. And as I've matured in my walk with Christ, I've learned that you have to have courage. And you've got to be willing to do what God tells you to do, even when it seems like it may cause problems or harm or even destruction for you. You've got to know that God is with you. And we see here in today's lesson, that's what we're going to talk about, going forward and obeying God fearlessly. And as always, it's such a pleasure to be here for the Sanctuary Sunday School lesson, powered by the Sanctuary Academy. And today we are talking about Gideon destroys Baal's altar. And we're in the book of Judges in the 6th chapter. And this is one of my favorite scriptures because I'm pretty much not the kind of person who's scary, and I like people who are not scary. So we see here we have Gideon. Now this was at a time where the Midianites had just been oppressing them, and at this point it had been 7 years, and they had run them up into the hills. They would try to go and press wheat and hide just to get things to eat. And this is where Gideon was. And just go back a little bit ahead of this lesson, a few verses above. When God came to Gideon, he called him a mighty man of valor. And I love that because this was at a time when the people were afraid and they were up in the mountains, and the Midianites were pretty much doing whatever they wanted to do to them and taking everything they had. And while Gideon was there living and hiding from the Midianites, God called him a mighty man of valor. And I love that because, see, when God addresses you, he addresses you by who he called you to be, not by your current circumstance. And that is just a blessing. I'm going to say that again. God addresses you by who he called you to be, not by your current circumstance. And so he called him this mighty man of valor. And he told him that the Lord was with him. And Gideon said, well, how are you going to be with me if you're allowing us to go through all of this and you're allowing us to live like this? How are you with us? And so they were in that situation though, because again, at the very beginning of this passage, it said that the children of Israel, had done evil in the sight of the Lord. So God allowed this to happen to them. But now he was ready to deliver his people, and he was going to use Gideon to do so. And so Gideon said, well, if you're with me, reveal yourself to me. And God did just that. And when he knew and he recognized God, Gideon worshiped God. He built an altar and he worshiped God right there where he was. And so God said, okay, he accepted Gideon's worship. He said, but I have an assignment for you. And he told Gideon to go and to tear down Baal's altar and to cut down the groves. Now, what they were having the groves, if you've ever been to Disney World, you'll see the trees and the shrubberies. They're cut in the shape of the Disney character. So they did something similar like that. They already had the idol statues of Baal, but they would have the groves there around the statue, the shrubbery, the trees, and they would have them cut into patterns, and it was all like a whole little plaza area to worship Baal. And God told him, you go tear down that altar and you cut down the groves around the altar. And when you cut down the groves, you use the wood from the groves to build me an altar and burn an offering to me in that spot. And he told him to sacrifice the second bullock of your father. Now, again, this was the children of Israel. They had gotten there and they had adopted these heathen practices of worshiping idol gods. They started worshiping Baal as well. And so God saw fit to deliver them, and he tore down. So before he could deliver them, because the story that we know about Gideon, right, the most popular one is where he took the 300 men and he defeated the army with blowing the picture and the lanterns. That's the story that we all know. But before God could do that, he had to tear down Baal's altar and build up an altar to worship him. See, sometimes we want to get to the deliverance before we have the sacrifice. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes we want to get to the deliverance before we offer up a sacrifice. But before God could deliver them, he had to destroy those idol gods and get them back to worshiping him, the one true and living God. And Gideon did exactly what God told him to do. He took 10 of his men. He went, he tore down that idol, he cut down those groves, he used the groves, the wood from the groves, and he burnt that offering of the 7-year-old second bullock to the Lord. And so, of course, the next day, when they saw what happened, they were angry. And because that was the God that they were worshiping, and now they said, well, who did this? And when they started to search around and find out, they found out that it was Gideon. And then they all wanted to get together and kill Gideon for for tearing down the altar. Now I want to backtrack a little bit, because when God told Gideon to do this, he said to him, you shall not die. Now we see here, they were seeking to kill Gideon because of what he has done. But God said to Gideon, you shall not die. So that's a strong message that's kind of nestled in here, because when God tells you something, it doesn't matter who says differently. What God says always ultimately prevails. So we see here that Joash, he spoke up and he said, wait a minute, we're going to kill Gideon because he cut down Baal's groves and because he destroyed Baal's altar. He said, you gonna plead for Baal? Baal is a god. He says, so we can't save Baal. Baal is the God. He's supposed to be saving us. So if he's a God, let him fight his own battle. We're not going to fight Baal's battle for him. Let him fight his own battle, right? And it says right here in this verse, if he be God, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. So let Baal handle this. And this was how God saved Gideon's life. And as we know, like I said earlier, the way this story turned out, after God had Gideon destroy the altars of Baal, he came back and he did use Gideon to deliver his people. And if I could use a secondary topic to this lesson, I would make it first things first. A lot of us are dealing with very difficult situations right now, and we're asking God for deliverance. And some of you may even be wondering, like Gideon, God, why are you allowing this to happen to me? And I challenge each of us, including myself, to go back and to tear down everything in your life that's not like God. And then worship God in the midst of your circumstance. Worship him, glorify him, honor him, obey him, and then watch God move on your behalf. See, sometimes when we're in difficult situations, we lose faith and we become fearful. But we're talking here, this entire unit is about acts of valor, where you have to stand up and take courage and do things that most people would not do. And that's where we need to be in this time. Because just like the Midianites were oppressing the children of Israel, we live in a very similar time today. A lot of churches are struggling to rebound from the pandemic. And some of us are really trying to get back to the way things were. And let's just seek God and ask him, what is it that you want me to do? What direction are you taking me in your will, in the ministry? Submit to the will of God. Commit to worshiping God, and watch how God will bless you and deliver you from whatever your circumstance may be.